Welcome to the Hidden History Happy Hour podcast with Alex Dean and Brian Cunningham. Here we have a drink, have a laugh, and you just might learn something about our favorite stories from history.
Please visit our website at hiddenhistoryhappyhour.com and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And if you like the show, please rate us 5 stars and leave a review. Cheers.
Welcome back, and thanks again, listeners, for your fabulous support that has put Hidden History Happy Hour in the top 5% of broadcasts worldwide. Alex, I think that deserves another cheers.
Cheers.
Look, we have a very special guest for you today, listeners. An even bigger player on the world stage than our own Alex Dean, if you can imagine.
I concede this.
To boot with a remarkable collection of historical documents. And in just a moment, Alex will introduce you to McLaren Racing CEO and amateur historian Zak Brown. But first, though, we know that many of you have saved the date for June 6, 2022 for our big live event in New York City. Today, we can share with you 2 big announcements. First, we will be having not 1, but 2 live events in Manhattan in June 6th and June 7th, or 6 June and 7 June if you're on the continent or in the UK and you're traveling here. And we are thrilled to announce that both events will be live at the Bowery's most haunted and, in my humble opinion, most fun bar and ghost sighting establishment, the Von Bar. That's VONBAR.com at 3 Bleecker Street in the Bowery. Please check out our show notes and go to vonbar.com and check this place out. And if you're in the New York City area, no need to wait until June 6th or 7th. Stop by the Von Bar anytime. Check out how cool it is, and maybe you'll even see a ghost. We've got some great surprises in store, even if you think you know about us and you know what we're about. One thing we can tell you today, though, is that the second live event in New York City, the June 7th event, will be a haunted hidden history hour where we'll talk ghosts, we'll talk ghost history, we'll talk the most haunted building in New York, and of course, we'll have some bespoke ghostly cocktails. So please join us for one or both of our live shows. And who knows, you might just end up on our show. And if that's not enough, if you RSVP for the event, you may win an autographed copy of Alex's book, Lessons from History. Please hit us up on Twitter or email at hiddenhistoryhappyhour@gmail.com. And we can't wait to meet all of you. Now, based on some of Zak's recent interviews, in addition to being fascinating and accomplished, Zak is remarkably candid, and so he'll fit right in here at the Hidden History Happy Hour. Alex.
Thanks, Ryan. Zak, it's great to have you with us. Zak's been known to me for a little while. It's when you meet people in business sometimes, and you think that is one interesting person who thinks about ideas, and turned out and got a fascination with history that parallels my own. So, Zak, welcome to the show.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Well, it's just tell us about you. Many people who know you in your professional industry may not know that you're a huge history buff and you're a huge collector. So how did that get started with you?
I think it got started by me missing most of my school career. And I don't know. I think when you're, well, I can only speak for myself. When you're young, I wasn't fascinated by history. I think I was in race car mode early on. And then I think as you get a little bit older, you start to appreciate the finer things in life and the history. And so I just became fascinated, I don't know, probably 15 years ago in kind of world history and mafia and prime ministers and just, the
sometimes
history.
The same thing.
So sometimes the same thing, exactly. And then set about collecting fascinating documents that then you kind of look back on and you look at the history behind each document. And so it's just become a real hobby.
Oh, that's great. And when you say it became, were you 15 years ago, you were still driving, or you?
Let's see. I would have stopped driving in 2000, so 22 years ago.
Okay, and then so there's this new interest develops, and is there a particular area of history that you're more into than others? Is it American history? Is it political history?
No, it's kind of all the above. I've got my collections kind of broken down into. I have every U.S. president, and then most of the significant Americans, politicians, whether it was, Ben Franklin or Alexander Hamilton. And then I like the mafia.
Right.
I've got the John Gottis and the Bugsy Siegels and Al Capones. Then kings and queens. I've got Henry VIII and Ferdinand and Fidel Castro. And then your Albert Einsteins and your Thomas Edisons, and then your financial, the John Rockefellers and the Andrew Carnegies. So it's a bit of an eclectic collection, but it's something I've built up over the last 15 years.
And what kind of, when you say you've got them, these are documents, these are, does it always have to be a signature, or it could be handwriting? What kind of thing is it?
So they're predominantly letters, and they're all signed. I try and get things that have historical significance with the U.S. presidents, because I wanted to have the collection. There's a few tick the box documents from some of, if there's such a thing as a lesser known president,
right?
But
An obscure a more obscure one.
Yeah, the Woodrow Wilsons. I don't know why I'm picking on him. Hope none of his descendants are listening. But I made sure the JFKs and the Eisenhowers and the Reagans and the Lincolns and the Washingtons, that I've got something of historical significance. And on the mobster side, have some arrest warrants and fingerprints, which are kind of cool. And then things like King Henry VIII was written by his scribe, and then he signed it. And that happened to be a letter to a cardinal about his early marriage. So that was quite a cool.
Which one? The first marriage?
Exactly. He sent in, I always get it in the wrong order. He sent in, what was it, Catherine first and Anne Boleyn, or the other way around? But he sent in one of his people to go talk to a cardinal, because of course he fell out with the church back then, and he sent in the father of who was going to be his next wife to discuss an annulment. So that was Catherine, and Catherine.
The really thing the easiest thing to remember about Catherine, which people forget, is that she was married to Henry's brother. She was married to Arthur, who died, and then she married Henry after he went on the throne. And they had to get a papal dispensation to get married. So the Pope must have been really bothered by all these. First of all, you got a dispensation to marry her. Now you want a dispensation to get rid of her.
Look, Sam.
Yeah, none of that stuff would have flying today, would it?
No. Well, I just want to say Sam Neill did a great job of negotiating that whole thing for Henry. And also, Zach, I want to mention that I'm actually the son of an Episcopal minister. And as you probably know, the Episcopal Church in the U.S. is the offshoot of the Church of England. So I always like to say the only reason my father's job existed is that Henry VIII wanted a divorce.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Very cool.
That's a great set of documents.
Mm-hmm.
Most people who are into the kind of history that you're setting out have a favorite president. So I want to know, first of all, who your favorite president is, but second of all, what do you have? What's the document that you have from your favorite president?
Obviously, Zachary Taylor.
Yeah, he would be one of the lesser known ones. And he spelled his name wrong. So had he spelled it right, maybe I would have. Let's see. So I've got my George Washington document is pretty fascinating. It is a letter to a person in his military, giving them grief. Now, I'm not quite how he's written it, but giving him grief for not capturing Benedict Arnold and letting him slide through.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a pretty cool
man without a country.
So that's a pretty cool piece. I've got an Alexander Hamilton, which of course wasn't a president, but he wrote a letter on the orders of George Washington to get some money put together for the Whiskey Rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty
that's historic
cool piece. Yeah. Then I've got a JFK and Robert Kennedy signing a pardon for a mafia member, which I think is kind of cool.
Yes.
And then another one that is very historically significant is the letter from Richard Nixon to Kissinger resigning the presidency of the United States.
You have that letter?
Yeah.
I've seen that. I've seen pictures of that everywhere with its kind of initialed HK when he received it.
How do you possibly have that? How do you possibly have that?
So here's what's interesting with, then I'll tell you another piece that I have that is probably the most unique. These things get passed down from generation, families, things of that nature. And I think, if I look at, my kids who don't have the same level of appreciation for the historical documents that I do, I know what happens is as these things get, handed off to family members, friends, and family, and they become further separated from the people that appreciated them at the time, people go, how much is this thing worth? I'll take the cash.
Let's find out. Right.
Yeah.
Kissinger's still alive. So, I mean, he didn't, I doubt he'd give that away. Well, did he?
Well, it should be in the National Archives.
No, I'm glad it's with Zach, actually. Right?
Yeah. So, and I've also got, I know we're not kind of baseball guys necessarily, but that's another one that blows me away is I have, I don't know if you guys remember Pete Rose, but I have his rookie of the year trophy. Now, Pete sold all his stuff when he ran into issues. So you've got things that you would sit there and go, why would someone ever get rid of that? I've also got Nicky Lauda's first Formula One Grand Prix winning trophy. And when Nicky was around, I actually asked him about it. And he remembered giving it to a guy at a petrol station, guy who owned a petrol station. And I mean, who would have ever thought they would give up their first Grand Prix trophy? So you get things in probably the one that is the most fascinating is I have Jacqueline Kennedy's handwritten will from 1964. And where that went was handwritten by her, passed to her lawyer, passed to the accountant. Accountant gave it to the daughter, and this is all a while ago, and ultimately got sold. The thing that's most fascinating about that document is unlike today's will, where it's all typed out and it says this bank account goes here and this bank account goes there. This has, the desk that Charles de Gaulle left in the White House for Jack. I want that to go to, I can't remember if she called him John Jr. or Jack Jr. The watch that Jack was wearing that day in Dallas, I want that going to John Jr. The necklace that Jack gave me for our 10th wedding anniversary, I want going to Carol. I mean, it's a very 10-page, and the most fascinating piece is at the end, after she signs it, it says, P.S. In the unlikely event I get remarried, I want to be buried next to Jack in Arlington, even if it's against my future husband's wishes.
Will. My word.
Yeah.
Wow. That is incredible.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one that's like memory lane because the level of detail is spectacular. It's a personal memoir of her and Jack and how she got everything, where it came from, why it had a meaning to her, and where she wanted it to go. It was fascinating.
Well, Zach, all we have to do is track down the handwritten directions from Putin that all these oligarchs could commit suicide. That's going to be a major addition to your collection.
Yeah, I think I've got a few Russian pieces, but nothing from the current guy.
Well, it's not history yet, right?
Well, I was going to ask you, I guess. You got stuff in English, but you also have stuff in other languages. So you got obviously got stuff in Russian.
Yes. Yeah. And French, some Napoleon, some of it's pretty difficult. Well, obviously the French and the Italian and that, I don't speak those languages, but even as the more historical, British, I can't read the Henry VIII
the handwriting
document. Yeah. No, I can't. I don't have a clue. It's just been translated for me, but I can't read it.
Right. That's and you said you have something from that was Napoleon's.
Yeah, no, my Napoleon document isn't that exciting. It was a military appointment, so my Napoleon's not overly exciting.
But so still, the great man signed it. Well, this is something. It's very interesting to me. You talk about having one thing, and then we only have one thing in the archive from any given person or individual?
Yes, I've tried to get a variety, so I don't have multiple of any person.
Right. Sorry, Brian, I interrupted you.
No. I was just going to ask Zach because I'm fascinated by this. You know, we're running up to our 14th episode, thanks to everybody, and I at least have become more and more interested in kind of the practice of history itself. You know, amateur and professional, and how do we rely on things? We had a great guest last time talking about the ancient Greek warfare, and you have an impressive, maybe unique set of actual signed historical documents. What do you think will be what will the Zak Brown in 100 years be looking at from our era? Will it be tweets after Elon Musk buys Twitter and opens it up? What are the well, yeah, right. Will it be, and what will be the primary sources 100 years from now, do you think?
Well, it's funny. I've been approached a lot about NFTs around my collection, which that's the new. It's the digital age, and I think it was what Jack Dorsey's
token, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I guess if I remember correctly, the first ever tweet sent by Jack Dorsey went for a couple $1 million,
exactly,
a year or two ago. So I guess that's where it's going to go. I think everyone's always going to have an appreciation for history. So all these guys and gals, they're not signing these anymore. So I'd like to think while maybe the historical documents will be collected in a different manner, there is still always going to be an appreciation for the original thing.
I agree, but also though there's a huge question of verification, right? So 100 years from now, if someone looks at a tweet that is signed by quote unquote, let's say Donald Trump, how do they know that's Donald Trump versus a bot farm in St. Petersburg? And so to analogize that to what you have, how did you validate the authenticity of the things you purchased?
Yeah, so I've been had over a couple of times. Fortunately, not many. The newer stuff.
If only Alex could say that.
Thank you, Brian.
The newer stuff. I think the presidents went to AutoPen sometime in the 60s, and then today,
yes,
I would imagine almost everything's AutoPen. When you are known as a collector, where to buy from and who to buy from. And then the older the document, the harder it is, like a clip signature, which I would never buy. That's the easiest to forge. You start getting into a document from Henry VIII.
Yeah.
A lot of effort goes into getting the paper right, the ink right. It's a full page. So to be able to replicate that is pretty darn difficult. You want to buy from reputable auction houses and reputable collectors. So I get everything verified, or I know who I'm buying from. I've had my Winston Churchill, which was a signed photo, was not real. I've since replaced it. It feels pretty dirty, as you can imagine, if you bought something.
Yeah.
And you never quite know. I upgraded my Churchill, so I actually sold my Churchill to another collector. He bought it, and he's the one that then came back and went, "Oh, it's not real." So you can get fooled, but the more complicated the document, the better. And then the other thing you have to be careful of are stolen documents.
Yep.
So I've been presented with documents that shouldn't be in someone's hands, and so you have to be careful there. So I've been doing it a long time. I usually the fake stuff is the sucker, the kind of first timer. So I think once you get pretty experienced, I hope nothing that's in my collection isn't what I think it is.
So a couple notes about AutoPen particularly for our North American listeners. I was a Senate aide pretty much right out of college, and the very first thing you learn to do if you work for a U.S. senator is forge their name.
Absolutely. We've had with some of our racing drivers, not our current two, and I stopped it. We've had over the years managers sign on behalf of the drivers, and I put a stop to that as soon as I heard about it. I'd rather not give a fan a signature than give them someone else's signature, because they put it on their wall, they put it on their desk, and they admire it, and it's from their hero, and I know what it feels like to then find out at a later date it's not real. I would have rather not had it in the first place. So you definitely have to be careful these days.
What kind of, these are, con artists who must be very gifted, I suppose, if they're able to forge documents that are, convincing enough to get past an auction house or get past an expert who you've instructed to evaluate something, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of money on the line, so the payoff, even if they're sitting there all day trying to perfect it and have to throw away 25 of them before they go, ooh, that one looks pretty good, because a pen and a piece of paper won't cost much, and then it's counterfeit, money. It's funny. One of my favorite shows is American Greed, and you sit there and these criminals, they're pretty darn smart, and you go, God, if they would have just channeled that in a positive way. I mean, you go back and you look at the Enrons and the Madoffs of the world. I mean, you got to be a genius to do what he did. Eventually the song stops and these guys are still caught dancing. But Madoff was no dummy to be able to do what he did for as long as he did. I mean, the guy was a genius. Unfortunately, he pointed it the wrong direction.
It's the genius, but it's also the brazenness. Like they just figured if they tell the same lie enough times, it's gonna be believed.
It was funny on Madoff. I was still am friends with the former CEO of UBS, and I asked him about it once, and he said, "Yeah, I went to go see him, and it didn't make sense to me." It's amazing how many now people come out and say, "Right, I never believed it." Exactly. And so he was at Credit Suisse at the time, and he went in and he said Madoff was ultra aggressive with him. Who do you think you are? It's just went on the total offense. He then came back, kind of told the clients, I don't believe it. You shouldn't do it. Half left. And for 10 years it went on. And those that left were furious because they thought they left. And they shouldn't have, because it just continued. And then half stayed in. I mean, I might have my numbers wrong, but a strong amount stayed in, and then they ended up getting burned. And those that pulled out, 10 years later, looked back and went, that was just, smartest thing. So I think some people, I think you have to trust your instinct. If I come across something that just doesn't feel right, there's no document I have to have. So if something doesn't feel right, I walk.
It's interesting. Bernie Madoff is the example that you chose. I thought it was very astute. We had a guest on our show called Willard Foxton, who's a documentary maker and a great lover of history, like us. And his father was a Madoff victim. They lost all of their family money, and in the end, I'm afraid his father, faced with this, didn't want to go on, and
Yeah.
he took his own life. And so we know a little about the fallout from these people. And Brian is right, it can be brazen and it can be awful, but God, the consequences that those things have had for people's lives, they lose their family savings and so forth.
Well, I spent a good chunk of my career prosecuting Cali cartel kingpins in the Clinton administration, and it's the same thing. They just bully their way through, and until somebody gets in their way that's willing to risk everything, they succeed. I'm not drawing any parallels to any contemporary issues.
Understood. Yeah. Okay. Now I understand. Yeah. All right. Let's Zach. Back to you. I have no background in history, not even as an undergraduate. I've developed this fascination over time, and that's like you. It's not my job, and it's not your job. But I wonder if your interest in history informs your work. Have you deployed lessons from history in your present day life? Do you find Formula One sort of rich history? What's the historical angle on your day to day?
Yeah, I think with me, I love the history of motor racing. As much, if not even more, than the historical documents. So I've got a car collection that is historic to me and memorable, and have memories of great races and great drivers and great championships. And I do collect things from racing now that it's probably not going to be quite as cool as Henry VIII, but things like when I did this shoey with Daniel Ricciardo on the Monza podium, that was quite a cool moment. I kept the shoe, I kept the champagne bottles, so certainly can't compare that to the significance of George Washington, but things that
it means something to you.
Definitely means something to me, and means something to my family. So I think that'll be something that when my time comes, my kids will go, I was there with Dad when he was on the podium in Monza. Right. So creating a little bit of more family history than I think that anything that's going to sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Well, just to take a little bit of a turn, Zach, I checked out your recent interview at the Oxford Union, and Alex, I know Oxford doesn't count to you, but it was a very effective, very good interview. And it struck me that the way you described the competition in the racing business, including what we in the intelligence business would have called information operations, is in many ways similar to warfare. You're disrupting enemy plans. You're attacking in unexpected places. You're picking and choosing your fights. How do you, if at all, translate your knowledge of the history of warfare to your day job?
A great question.
Yeah, this is a good question. I guess you fight to win, for starters, I think there's two types of CEOs in this world, or at least I'm told there are. And I wouldn't even necessarily say CEOs, people. And those people that are motivated by the thrill of victory, and those that are motivated by the fear of defeat. And I'm very much motivated by the fear of defeat. I kind of, which is probably the unhealthier way to go through life, is because it comes with a constant pressure, but that's what motivates me. I kind of like being the underdog, and I think great leaders in this world have great people around them, are great communicators for the most part, and so those are things that I admire about historical leaders. And things. I don't think I consciously go, well, this president did this, so this is how I'm going to do it. But that's kind of how I roll.
Well, so Zach, amongst your other accomplishments, you're, if my count is correct, thrice in the Sports Business Journal 40 Under 40 Hall of Fame. So you come from not just being a driver yourself, but also a journalist. How do you feel the current crop of sources of information, including journalism, including podcasts, will inform the future of history?
Another good question. I wouldn't want to paint, and I won't paint everybody with this brush because that
Right.
is not fair. There is great journalism, and then there's really poor journalism. And I think I'll make this stat up, and it's a made up stat. So I apologize to anyone that doesn't.
Hey, we rely on made up stats.
Welcome to our show.
Have you met us?
So if the media, pick it 20 years ago was, 80% accurate, 20% wrong. I'm not saying it's gone 20/80, but I know from a lot of stuff that I read, that I know the facts on. Right. I'm shocked at the varying degrees of they got that a little bit wrong to what are they talking about?
Well, and intentionally wrong.
And intentionally
versus just
wrong.
Didn't check their sources.
Correct. And then unfortunately, most people believe what they read, and it's no different than COVID, which has been horrific. That's a fact. Mm-hmm. But depending on what news channel you turn on, the varying degrees. One TV channel, it's all over. You flip the channel, and
it's government oppression trying to
and it's everywhere in between. So I now I try not to almost overread, because you can get so many different variations on the same story. And to your point, either from just poor journalism and not fact checking to deliberate, we're trying to change the story. And that's unfortunate, because as there's so much noise in the system now, because in the good old days it was 4 or 5 TV channels. Now it's tens of thousands, from social media to TV to podcasts, that you have to be kind of pretty careful at what you believe these days.
Well, let's take a quick pause and just thank you for your team's work with the UK government to produce vital equipment at the outside of the COVID crisis. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when the UK government ran into their challenges, well, everybody did, around lack of ventilators, because obviously no one was prepared or anticipating what had happened here with COVID. We amongst a handful of Formula One teams and other kind of manufacturing and engineering companies, we came together and developed and built like 10 years worth of ventilators in about 10 weeks, which was something, when I used to walk around McLaren, I used to say, when we were kind of not having good days, hey, pick your head up. We're racing cars around Monaco. We're making people's lives better. We're not saving lives. But actually a couple of years later, to be able to say to those same people, we was felt really good. We were very proud about it. And it shows what I think when COVID happened, it showed how great people can come together when they're all aligned and kind of politics are dropped and you're trying to globally solve a problem.
Pulling the oars in the same way and thinking entrepreneurially. It's a kind of an amazing story, really. But let me ask you this. So if another pandemic comes around or another global emergency comes around, what would you want our governments to do differently to engage the private sector? Or do you feel like everything was pretty good last time?
I think we were pretty slow to react, but then very fast in a good way to react to pull out of this, because it clearly was not sustainable, fiscally or mentally, or even health to just all live in lockdown forever. At some point, you had to, these vaccines were awesome. How quickly the world came together. I mean, that was stunning.
Yeah, that's going to be. I mean, as Alex knows, I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump, but that effort, that was going to be written in journals 100 years from now, 200 years from now. It's I served in the federal government for a long time, and the idea of getting a memo signed in the time that they ramped up warp speed is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
The thing that is, and I love kind of politics and history. I look at how difficult it is to get the 10 team bosses in Formula One to all row the same direction.
Yes, right.
It's now clear to me why some governments around the world move as slow as they do, and things can't get done because we can't get the 10 team bosses together. As I say, the only thing we've ever unanimously agreed on is that we'll never unanimously agree on anything.
Yeah. Well, so talk about that, Zach. So you've got this very significant historical background in documents, and you have the experience of the politics, small p, of racing. Do you have best practices for our listeners? We have a lot of listeners in the government space. Do you have lessons for how they should try to make progress versus be stalled?
I wish I knew the answer to that, because we stall often. I think the biggest thing that I've tried to do in Formula One is get people to agree on the concept, then work through the details, right? Because often, and we're going through some topics now, we're always going through topics, those that are against it, they try and stop it with all the reasons why it won't work. And it's like, well, hold on, let's agree on the concept, and then let's talk about all the challenges. But it's kind of a way they use to stop progress. And so, not having ever sit in government before, so I don't know exactly how it all works, but I try and, let's not let the details get in the way of the big picture.
And
let's agree on the big picture. Yeah. And it's difficult. I now have an appreciation for why things are difficult to get through. I think, the only thing you can do is be passionate about a topic and stay with it.
Well, this is the journey I've been on. So I started as a baby CIA analyst during Reagan, and, off and on worked my way up. And I kept thinking naively, if I just got to the right layer of the onion, there would be a bunch of, wise philosopher kings that were unencumbered by political corruption and would just do the right thing. And the genius of our founding fathers is, Zach, and I think this probably comes out in some of your materials that you've collected, is they just assumed there were never going to be a philosopher king. And these are all going to be humans, and we had to have checks and balances to control them.
Yeah, it is amazing to look back on history and see how right they got most things, and how simple they were, and now, of course, the level of detail that goes behind each one. But the founding fathers in America, who would have thought a handful of guys were gonna sit in a room and knock out the rules of America? And
it was a startup, right?
Yeah, and to this day, they did a pretty damn good job.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw it back to Alex in a second here, but two other things I'm curious about is, one, I've watched not only the F1 documentary on Netflix, which is great, but also some of your interviews. And there's two, I just said one, but I'm about to list two. And that just proves to our listeners that we actually are drinking. And to that point, I'm drinking a little Johnny Walker right now. I hope this is not a faux pas. I hope you guys are still deeply involved with them. But one, women in racing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, especially given that I have two daughters, 23 and 21, and two, environment. Are electric cars the future? Can it be as exciting? What do you think is the responsibility of people in your seat to worry about that?
Yeah. So I'll tackle both of those. First, women. I presume you're talking about women drivers as opposed to just women in sport.
So, both. But you've encouraged both, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, 100%. So we have our first female racing driver in Emma Gilmore in Extreme E, and one of the reasons we entered Extreme E, well, not one of, but the primary was gender equality and sustainability. And so there has been, and there will be in the future, a female Formula One driver, and there are females racing in motorsports around the world. Danica Patrick won an IndyCar race. Yeah. I think the reality is for every Lando Norris, there are, pick a number, 10,000 people that wanted to be Lando Norris. And so, like all these sports, it's a pyramid and it's a numbers game. And if you don't have a lot of, whether it's a gender or a race or a country, a lot of volume at that kind of grassroots level, as you start to weed out the talent, Formula One's got the 20 best drivers in the world. And it took, I don't know what the number is, 100,000 people around the world racing to get to that 20 or 50,000, pick a number. Right. It's a lot of people around the world.
That's how we feel about our podcast, by the way.
Yeah. and so, when you go to the go-kart track, which I go to from time to time, you'll have, probably 200 drivers at any one weekend, but you probably only have 15 females. And so the odds are stacked against them from the word go. And the reality is a lot of karting starts with father taking, his 6-year-old son to go karting. So what we need to do is expose more girls. That's the age in which you need to start racing, is 6-7 years old, to karting. So until you get that volume of participants, it's going to be hard. Same thing with U.S. drivers. There's been very few U.S. drivers, men drivers in Formula One. That's because the system really requires you to be in Europe. So let's just take gender out of it. Of those same 200 karters that I've just told you about at any one weekend in Europe, while 10 or 15 might be girls, I bet there's no more than 10 or 15 Americans. And so that's where, if you want to call it the problem starts, is we need more of these different genders and races and countries at that grassroots level. But can an American be in Formula One? Of course. Can a female be in Formula One? Of course. Unlike maybe some other sports where, pure size and strength is required. What requires a great Formula One driver is hand-eye coordination. So they can do that as well as men. Neck strength, that's probably the biggest area of strength, but that can be worked on. And then what makes a great Formula One driver is intelligence.
Yes.
And, I think there'd be plenty of people that would argue they're smarter than us.
I know that Alex and I both have a person in our lives who would argue that very vociferously. And, that's the thing. So I'll just say, I came into this not a Formula One fan, although I will also say, at least I have a driver's license, which some people on this podcast do not have. But I watched the Netflix documentary. I watched a lot of your interviews, and I have to admit to a certain bias that the more expensive gear an athlete requires to succeed, the less sort of, Olympianly valid it is. But I'm changing my mind, and I might even become a fan of racing thanks to watching this stuff.
Oh, it's Netflix has done a unbelievable job of bringing on a younger audience, a female audience,
Yep.
a new audience, and I think our sport's always been fascinating, but it's always been broadcast from a race cars going around a racetrack, and there's so many other elements
Right.
to the sport. The money and the business that's unlike any other sport, that Netflix has really captured the off-track action, and people find it fascinating. It is fascinating, and I can't tell you how many people I've heard say, "I knew nothing about Formula One," to "I won't miss a Formula One race now." It's
Right.
not just created awareness; it's created total fandom.
Well, I'm fairly sure 10 minutes ago I said I was going to throw it back to Alex, but one other question, and then I will shut my mouth, maybe. And that is, how do you track the information operations that you do? It was pretty clear from your Oxford Union interview that you view all manner of psychological operations valid against your quote unquote enemy. How do you know what's cool and what's not legit?
I'm not sure I fully understand that question. In what sense?
Well, what I mean is you talked about how you will go out and recruit drivers. I think my interpretation that you don't really need, just to screw with your enemy. How much of the game is psychological versus not? Yeah.
Oh, it's a lot. It's a lot.
That's what I thought.
It's a lot. Yeah, no, it's the politics, and it's something that I enjoy because it is part of the game. And whether it's around corporate partners, whether it's around talent, whether it's around strategy, whether it's around trying to influence rules. I mean, if you take it to its extreme, last year the championship was concluded. There was a lot of politics going on around.
Yeah, and you've talked about that. You've talked about the role of each company and each team in dealing with that. Yeah,
so that's a big part of our sport is the psychological element, and it's between the drivers, the team bosses, and the engineers, and even just from a sporting standpoint, you're sometimes using, we all speak in code because we're allowed to listen to each other. And, now we're going to start getting into AI and voice recognition because and it's fascinating. This comes back to drivers having to be very smart. We'll ask, Lando or Daniel a question, and depending on how we ask them the question, we want either a real answer or a bogus answer, because we're trying to, draw another team into a pit stop. Correct. And so we're maybe either trying to throw them off our pit stop strategy. And so how a racing driver can be going 200 miles an hour on the absolute limit, fiddling with their steering wheel to get the car to go faster, and then be able to go.
Remember what your code is. Yeah.
Is that a real question or not a real question? It's fascinating.
The answer is blue. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Zach, would you change that rule? Would you change the rule so people can't? Do you think it's part of the game? Do you think it's part of the sport?
I think it's part of the game. I think it's great. No, I think it's part of the game.
Fair enough. That's real. That's sort of espionage levels of comms in F1 that I hadn't thought about. One thing I did want to ask you is, because we were talking about current events, and what Brian was asking earlier, is this history yet? And you guys are making history in your sport with the new venture into Miami, and This is one of the things you were talking about, memories you're going to, you look back on when you retire, and your families look at your collection and think, I was there when Dad did this or that. Is this a real yardstick? Is the Miami venture a really big, is it as big a deal as I think it is?
And why?
Yeah, it's a huge deal. America now, and I think Netflix has played a huge part in that, is totally embraced Formula One. America is fascinated by the sport that has this great history, but it's kind of new to a lot of people. And it's got a great promoter, the owners of the NFL Dolphins, Miami Dolphins, who knows how to promote. You've got A-list celebrities. I've never seen as much corporate demand and fan demand for a Grand Prix as I have Miami.
Is that right? Gosh,
yeah,
so much more than Austin, much more than Texas.
Well, Texas has been unbelievable, but Miami's just at another level. And I think some of it's market, some of it's timing, right? Austin. Right. I don't think we would have a Miami if it wasn't for Austin. So I think Austin,
they got you there.
Austin's due as much credit as anyone. Last year, Austin was the biggest ever live attended Formula One race. So Some people have said to me, is Austin tapered off? Yeah, and it was spectacular. So I think, and now you've got Vegas coming on the back of that, which I think will have the same demand as Miami. I think Miami and Vegas will only drive more excitement for Austin. So you now have Netflix, a great broadcaster, fantastic racing, and 3 great races. Texas, which has great technology companies. It's a great college town. It's a youthful city and state. You've got Miami, which is very international, and then of course Las Vegas, which has all the bling of what we think about in Formula One. I think it's almost the next Monaco. So you put all those together, Formula One's just on fire.
So that's great to know. But if I think about the level of enthusiasm in America for sport per se, which is, it's sports crazy country, the level of enthusiasm in America for motor ventures, racing and leisure and so forth, which is huge. And the footprint of F1 in other parts of the world where, in Europe, we've got lots of races in different places. That would imply to me that 3 is the beginning, and that, it's not going to be, it's never going to be Miami instead of Austin. It implies there's going to be no upper limit to the number of new F1 championships that you potentially could have in the United States, right?
Right. Yeah. I think 3 is the max. I think we're in a
Okay.
Spot. Wow. Only because we need to. It's a global championship, and I would now say Asia is the next territory that we need to really have great impact. Unfortunately with COVID, we've missed Asia the last couple of years. So I think we need to, we've got great races there in Singapore and Japan. China's off again this year, unfortunately. And like America, which has really needed a couple races, now 3 to really have a strong presence. China's huge. And it's such an important, in Asia, such an important market. I think the Japan race is awesome and has a long history of Formula One. Singapore took Formula One yet to another level. I think we're about 10 years into well, I think even more than 10 years into Singapore now. And so I think we're in a great place in America and encouraging Formula One. Let's get a second race in China or a race in Hong Kong or India. We were in for a few years. It'd be great to go back there. So I think there's other parts of the world that we need to dial up before a 4th race is necessary in America.
Well, Zach, I'm sitting here in Seattle. What about a couple more races in North America?
Yeah, I think the 3 we have now gives us what we need to have the sport be really strong in America. So I don't think a 4th or a 5th race is needed, because that would come at the detriment,
at the expense of somewhere else.
Correct.
Right. Well, look, Zak, we're a history podcast, and we can't let you go without asking you about one other aspect of history, because I know that you've raced historic cars, right? In historic races. So I think it was Monte Carlo Historique?
Yep.
Was one of those. So do you still do that? And what's it like?
Yeah, I love it. I am a car collector. I get out a few times a year. I wish I could do it more, but the day job, which I love, is keeps me very busy. So I get out a couple times a year. I always use the Formula One summer break as a good time to go racing, because I know there's no racing then. And I get out and I enjoy the cars and the fellow competitors I race against, who also have an appreciation for historic cars. So, I've gone from kind of collecting the diecast models to be in a fortunate position where I can get I've got some of the full scale versions now.
Big boys toys. What's the oldest thing you've got that's still on the road?
1965 289 Cobra.
You know what? That might have competed in the Sandusky, Ohio sprint car competition, which I witnessed as a 14-year-old.
Very much
a long time ago.
Yep, 100%.
Well, Zak, it's been fantastic to have you. Thank you.
So
You're
good.
welcome anytime you like. The history of Formula One is playing out before our eyes, and it's great to know that you're leading it. It's been fantastic to have you on the Hidden History Happy Hour.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Zak.
I've enjoyed it.
Thanks, buddy.
Cheers.
Listeners, please make sure to tune in to our next episode. We will have another major announcement. First of all, Hidden History Happy Hour's first sponsor, and more importantly, from my standpoint as a lifelong bourbon drinker, the official bourbon of the Hidden History Happy Hour. We couldn't be happier, and we know you will love it. So tune in next time. And most of all, thanks to you, our listeners, for your continued support and participation, and keep the comments and ideas coming. And please tell your friends. Until next time, Alex Dean.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Hidden History Happy Hour podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And if you have questions, comments, or suggestions for topics, you can find us on Twitter or on our website, hiddenhistoryhappyhour.com. We look forward to joining you next time.
Much gratitude to our multi-talented production team of Jeremy Core, Kate Cruz, and Grace Keller, and to our visionary executive producer, Ivan Williams. And thanks also to our art designer, David Wardle, without whom this podcast would be, well, history.
Cheers.